con ese directo en el que está Carlos Ratti, es profesor en esa institución en el MIT. Vamos a escucharlo ya en el Global Mobility Call.
Mobility, so we also exercise, and so somehow by designing the city, we can then influence and change the mobility that will happen inside it. Okay?
Thank you.
Yes.
If you don't mind, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes, I'm Christopher Carey. I'm with Cities Today, the magazine about smart cities globally. I just had a question. So we've heard a lot about sustainability and collaboration and the need to work together to build a sustainable future. But looking at it practically, if you could give cities 3 practical examples of what they can do or start doing today to make this a reality, what would that be?
If I had to give 3 examples, I would say data, data, and data. I mean, it has been mentioned a lot here at the conference, but basically data means we know much more about the city. Data means we know about the city also in real time, what's happening, and that's the beginning in order to redesign a mobility system, to improve it, to think about, different way to engage citizens more. So I would say that data platforms are really the key in order to achieve this. And data platforms, by the way, some people talk today about digital twins. Digital twin is a digital copy of the physical city with all the real-time data feeds. And a digital twin becomes, I believe, a great tool to understand mobility, to design it better, and ultimately to change the way we enjoy it.
Question. Do you think that public-private collaborations are essential to deliver this?
Yeah, well, I think, we have many cases of successful PPPs, or actually I like to talk about not only PPP, public-private partnerships, also PPPP, which is where the last P is people, with people involved. And I think, there's many good examples related to mobility. Usually, to me, the key thing is that usually when you increase competition, you create very good markets. One has to pay attention to PPP or PPPs when basically if the result then is less competition, because then you can end up in more tricky situations. But I would say that certainly public-private partnerships engaging as well can be a solution in many cases. Again, as we said a moment ago, data can help us to rethink PPPs. So in the past, we can only specify, have an agreement that will specify some kind of static variable. With data, with real-time data, we can move to dynamic KPIs. And dynamic KPIs can really help us make our cities better and more sustainable. So again, data as well can help us change public-private partnerships in a way that they are, more nimble, flexible, responsive, and can be framed in a way that were not possible when the data was not there.
Mm-hmm. Hi, good afternoon. Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm from Eco Business. So we're a Singapore-based media organization, and we write about sustainability. I'm the correspondent from the Philippines.
Nice.
What I'd like to ask you is, can you give 3 things you think that congested cities in Asia, in Southeast Asia, can learn from cities in Europe or the States in terms of making the cities more livable?
Well, I don't think this is a moment where, cities in Asia should learn from cities in Europe. I think, there's really collective learning. And for instance, Singapore, you mentioned Singapore. Singapore is doing a lot of experiments that the whole world is learning from in terms of self-driving and, what I was mentioning before. I don't know if you were there, but basically trying to see how self-driving can have an impact on the way we move, on regulation in the city, and so on. There's a nice committee in Singapore advising the government. I'm part of the committee called CARS, Committee for Autonomous Road Transportation Systems. So somehow I would say that, I don't think there's some cities getting everything right and the other cities having to copy. I think there's something similar to what happened 20 years ago with digitization. At the time it was the dot-com, it's when all the digitization, the big companies that digitize the physical world, the Google of the world, the Facebook and so on were born. Today is a similar time, but it's not just about digital, it's digital and physical together. and mobility qualifies. It's data applied to physical system, to infrastructure, to cars and so on. And in a similar way to what was happening a couple of decades ago, I think there's a lot of trial and errors going on all over the world. And I think that's an exciting thing. So Singapore, as we were saying, doing a lot of experimentation with self-driving. Cities such as Copenhagen working a lot on active mobility, bikes, e-bikes, other systems, and also clearly with an angle on sustainability, and so many other cities around the planet. So I think we should all learn from each other. And I think, the goals are very clear. The goals are about decarbonizing the mobility system, making people's lives better, avoiding wasting time in traffic. So I think the objectives are clear, and I think the solution is going to be a combined solution of what many cities across the planet are experimenting today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sean Golding-Carroll. I'm a journalist with Euractiv. We're based in Brussels. I have a question about urban mobility. So if we look at self-driving technology, I mean, this is going to be a huge thing. But at the same time that this is progressing, a lot of cities are actually taking steps to remove cars from city centres. If we look at Paris, they're completely transforming, and they're giving more space to things like bicycle and not cars. So what is the future of urban mobility? Is it things like self-driving cars, or is it a car-free landscape with active mobility?
It's a very good question. I would say, well, let me start with another question. Why do cars have 5 seats? Any thoughts?
So I can you can transfer your
I'm not asking anybody, but yes. The average size of the family, but that is based on something very important, which is that you own a car. So if you have a family and you own only one car, well, you need to size the car for the peak, and the peak means 4 or 5 people together. Maybe 4 or 5 people together only happens once a month, or maybe once a year, Christmas or Thanksgiving, you name it. But actually, you want to have enough capacity for the peak. Now, the interesting thing is that all the things we're discussing, based on data, based on self-driving, are moving mobility to something a bit different, something which is a service that you book and you get when you need it. So sometimes you're alone and you get something small, sometimes you are 4 of you, and then you get a full car. Sometimes it might be like a shared taxi, which is like the reinterpretation of those beautiful taxis in Cuba that have, 10 or 15 people, and they do dynamic route. Many people see that as a future of mobility, something like a self-driving little van that will take people around point to point all the way to your home, but actually by dynamically routing through all the origins and all the destinations for those people. So somehow I would say that the solution is probably in between what you're saying, and it is something where I would imagine many new form factors. We didn't have scooters on the road just 5 years ago, or almost nothing. Now they're a big part of urban mobility, a big part of the mix. In the same way, I think micromobility in general seems to me very active. I think we'll see many more little vehicles, maybe also cover, 1-seater, 2-seater, and so on. And also, I think the 10-seater or 15-seater could be the way we replace the big buses. Again, if you don't need to have a driver, so the size doesn't matter, you can have a small bus that do this kind of dynamic routing. So it seems to me that a lot of the things we're discussing here related to data, intelligence, self-driving, and so on, one of the consequences they will have is that, like in a, you could say almost like a biodiversity experiment, will create not anymore like today, where you got the bike, you got a 4-seater or 5-seater, and then you got the big thing, but we'll actually hybridize a lot of them in a way that will get many form factors. With 1-seater, 2-seater, it's two of us, we can just get a 2-seater. We don't need to have all that, 5 seats, half of them empty, and so on and so forth. By the way, I believe that there's different statistics in different countries. I don't know about Spain, but if you look at this, in most cases, the average number of passengers is 1.6. So it's totally useless today to have, to move a ton of steel with 5 seats or 7 seats, when on average you got 1.6. Again, I don't know the number in Madrid, in Spain, but that's a number that you get in the US. So again, I would say that it's not just car or just bike, like you're saying in Paris. I think we're going to see this kind of much bigger, broader biodiversity of vehicles, from the trottinette, from the scooters to the e-bikes and so on, to 1-seater, 2-seater, some standard 4-seaters still, and then probably a lot of the little van that could become a complement or a replacement to the buses we have today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Maria.
Hi, Maria from Flight Crowd. We're based in the UK, and we're focusing specifically on air mobility. And I think this is what my question to you will be about. So talking about urban air mobility, future flight, drones, and especially the air taxis. What are your thoughts? Do you think, is this for everyone? Is this going to...
Were you at the presentation, by the way, or no? No.
Oh, unfortunately.
No, you were not. Okay, no, because I
Apologies.
talked about it at the end. That I said clearly that I think that's not what you want to have in a dense city. And by the way, if you're interested, I also there's a McKinsey report where they asked myself and another guy from one of the, not Volocopter, but one of the big drone companies, to have a discussion. My point, I'll tell you my point. I think, first of all, drones are great. We can use drones for sensing the environment, for moving small things and so on. But when you think about drones moving people, and those are like helicopters. Like helicopters, got all the issues that helicopters have. Maybe a bit cheaper. They could be a bit cheaper. They could be faster to build. But the issues that a helicopter have are that just to be in midair, let alone to move, you need a lot of energy. That's physics. And then you move a lot of wind, you move a lot of air downwards, and then you generate a lot of noise. There's not really, that's physics. There's not many ways around it. And then, when you got many things, think about Manhattan. You got hundreds of thousands of cars entering Manhattan every day. And if you want to just, to have an impact in Manhattan with drones, you probably need 10,000 drones. I can imagine 10,000 drones, for sure, every day, a couple of drones will fall on somebody's head. And remember, in Manhattan, people used to be able to land on the top of skyscrapers, and I mentioned this before a famous accident on a building called the Pan Am building, now it's called the MetLife building, where a helicopter actually landed and then fell on the street. And since then, helicopters cannot land in Manhattan anymore. So what I'm saying here is that I think drones are great. They have tons of applications, but big drones to move people are, to me, they're not the solution for dense cities. When you do the math about physics, about the impact in terms of noise, the risk of even just one of them falling on somebody's head, just a statistical risk and all of that, it seems to me that's not what you want. But I think drones can play a big role for smaller things, for places where there's low density, not high density, for places where you want to have super fast response, like in the case of emergency and medicine. But I don't see that as tomorrow. It's an old dream. Even in Metropolis, over 100 years ago, the movie Metropolis, people imagine all these kind of flying pods. I don't think that's practical. I mean, there's a reason nature built us to walk on the ground. It's just physics, and when you start being up in the air, a lot of things can go wrong. So I don't see that as a future of urban mobility. I see drones as a future of many other things, but not urban mobility in dense cities.
I'll invite you to Paris Olympics 2024, when we'll see this on a large scale for sure.
Well, actually, we've been invited by the city to be part of to help with the opening ceremony, and so we're quite familiar with that. But again, it's a different thing to do something experiment or to run it in a city. Again, if I imagine 10,000, if you had 10,000 vehicles in Manhattan, you might be able to replace 10% of the vehicular mobility, not even. And imagine what the city would be with that. Today, there's a few helipads outside of Manhattan. There's tens of flights an hour, tens of flights a day, and everybody complains because of noise, because of that. Imagine not 10, but tens of thousands. So anyway, I'm a skeptic, but I love to be proven wrong. If you're interested, look at the discussion on the McKinsey magazine between myself and the other guy about the future of drones in cities. But again, drones are great. So I'm a drone enthusiast.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
Joe Appleton from Be Smart City in Germany. I'd just like to talk about Paris again and the 15-minute city concept. What would you say are the biggest obstacles for cities who would like to transform into 15-minute cities?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, first of all, yes, you're right. The 15-minute city concept emerged in Paris. La Ville du Quart d'Heure was developed initially by Carlos Moreno as an advisor to Anne Hidalgo. Carlos is a colleague and a friend. So we were saying before, the positives are quite good. By the way, I think that the 15-minute neighborhood idea also got a lot of traction during the pandemic, because during the pandemic we couldn't move, and so we all were hoping to have everything we needed close to us. But the positive, the pros are easy said. You know, we mentioned them. You know, it's about, you know, you have active mobility, you are healthier, less time commuting, less pollution, and all that. Now, going to your point about the obstacles, I see two types of obstacles. One is a physical thing, and it depends where you're doing it. In a city like Paris, could be easier because Paris is already designed around arrondissement. And, you know, you can think about the old neighborhoods in European cities to be that. But imagine trying to turn Los Angeles into a 15-minute city. That becomes almost impossible just because of the lack of density, just because the city is built for the car, is not built for people to move. We are working also in Brazil at the moment, doing one of the big developments of the initial original master plan of Brasilia. And Brasilia as well was designed for the automobile, so it's difficult to turn it into a 15-minute type of city. So first thing is about the urban fabric. If the urban fabric, some urban fabric is much more difficult to turn into a 15-minute city. Now, the second thing is not a difficulty, but a possible objection. And in the past 6 months, some critical voices have emerged about a 15-minute city. Two in particular, one by Ed Glazer, professor at Harvard, another one by Pierre Veltz in Paris. And both of them were highlighting that if you push the concept too much, then you increase segregation in the city. So basically, if you push it too much, then people will stay in their enclave. They will not connect with the broader city. And so I would say those to me are the two key difficulties you might encounter. One, again, going back to the physical structure of the city, sometimes it's difficult to turn that into a 15-minute neighborhood approach. And the second one about, you know, the fact that in some cases, pushing the concept too much could increase urban segregation.
Much.
Thanks.
Gabriel de la agencia ANSA de Italia. Antes ha puesto el ejemplo de Milán en la ponencia de 15 minutos. ¿Qué es lo que ha hecho Milán y qué otras ciudades están haciendo cosas para los 15 minutos?
See, I'll again reply in English, but you know, I mentioned Milan before. Milan, the mayor, Beppe Sala, is working a lot on the 15-minute city, but now this is quite a common thing, as it was mentioned before. You know, Paris is kind of the first city that started working on this. Anne Hidalgo was head of C40 at the time, and so she also brought this to the international mayors community. And so many of the cities related to C40, that includes Milan, that includes Lisbon, I believe, as well, is part of C40. But anyway, so just a bunch of mayors through C40 have been taking this concept further, but that was initiated by Paris. So that's to say, the comment I made before about Milan was more to say that today there's not one city which is doing everything right. I think there's many cities experimenting, and what we need to do is look at the good things, the good learnings from every city, and combine them in order to plan ahead. So that was my point. Maybe I'll add another little thing. Another thing that Milan did during the pandemic that I think is a good lesson for other cities is that Milan, as you know, was one of the first cities to be hit by the pandemic after China. If you recall, actually, Milan was the first big city to be hit, and then Madrid was next, and then I remember I was in New York at the time. Everybody in New York thought, you know, well, that's very far, and then New York was next in line. So remember the pandemic, the different ways came, you know, from city to city at the distance of maybe a week or 2 weeks, one from the other. And one thing that then Milan did, being the first city to suffer from this, was to do more experimentation. Usually cities look at best practices and just copy them. And that's not good for experimentation. If you look at best practices, you mean you look at another city that maybe tried something 10 years ago. Something B was designed 20 years ago, was then tested, was successful, but you keep on perpetuating the past. If you look at best practices, you basically look at lessons from the past and bring them into the future. So you're locking the future into the past. Now, during the pandemic, cities didn't have best practices, so they had to innovate more. And one of the lessons that Milan brought and shared with many cities that have been very popular with mayors in the past couple of years is thinking about the city as something where you test something new, maybe just in a temporary way, and then you see if it works, if it doesn't work, and based on that, you decide to keep it in the long term. Now, that's a different way to proceed by trial and error. That is kind of a new approach to planning. Is more risk-taking. It takes also more, you know, it requires more risk-taking, but certainly it can help us to innovate in cities faster.
¿Cuál sería su ciudad sostenible ideal? O sea, si pudiese construir una ciudad de la nada,
Yeah.
¿cómo la haría?
Well, I think, as I was saying, I don't think there's one ideal city, but if you ask me, I think what comes to mind is a beautiful book by Georges Perec. Georges Perec was a journalist and a writer, French writer, writing in the second half of the past century. And once he was looking at the ideal place to live in Paris. And he was imagining an apartment where every room would look at a different part of the city. So an apartment where I remember the kitchen would be next to Les Halles, which is where at the time you could buy food. It was a big general market of Paris, where I believe the bedroom was next to the Monceau, or one of the beautiful parks in Paris. So somehow, a combination of many different arrondissements, a combination of different parts of the city. If I had to answer your question, I would say that the ideal city is something similar. It's something that today takes the best things that are happening in different cities and combines them together. So it's probably a little bit a combination of Madrid, Paris, Sydney, New York, Cape Town, you name it, Rio de Janeiro, but with all the different innovations that each city is doing today. I did put Italian city. I could. We talked about Milan enough, but.
Are there any more questions? Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Zina from Mobility Makers. We're actually based from Paris. I have a question. Since we're talking about preparing facilities and technologies for urban city or the 15 minutes neighborhood, as you said, but do you think that our people and society are already welcoming the new system? And what would be the best approach or concrete ways to prepare the citizen and the culture to welcome the new system of urban mobility?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't think about, do you think, I wouldn't frame it this way, because if you think about it, our citizens prepared is almost like, we want to educate citizens, we want to force them to do something, we just ask if they're prepared. I think they should be the one deciding what they want. And in some cities, you might have citizens that want to have more cars. In some cities, it's the opposite. So I think that what I see as the role we have as architects, designers, researchers, but also as politicians is to try and test many things, but then let people pick what they want to do. And that goes back to what I was saying about Milan, the fact of doing trial and error. When Times Square was pedestrianized in New York, well, the decision was simple, let's try it as a temporary thing and see how it goes. Because everybody was scared. Nobody had pedestrianized a big chunk of New York at the time. And say, why don't we try it and see if it works, if it doesn't. If people like it, we'll keep it. So I think we should do more than that. So I wouldn't say we need to teach people what they need to like. I think we need to listen to people. And the best way to listen is to try something and allow people to vote with their feet. Not really to just vote with the feet, because, they go there, they like it, they use it, and then you say, okay, well, that's something we want to keep in the long term. So working between the short term and the long term usually is a very good way to listen to people and let the city evolve based on their input.
There are no more questions in the room. Thank you. Thank you, Carlo.
Thanks a lot. It was great to be with all of you, and happy to follow up by email or in other ways. But thanks all. Exciting conversations.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.